The following is a conversation with His Divine Grace, Hridayananda Das Goswami, on December 14th, 1986, in West Palm Beach, Florida.
So you have a question?
How can we know that the Gita is true?
Well, let me ask you, how can you know anything is true? What do you mean? Let me ask you something. What do you mean to know something is true? Make sure we're speaking the same language. What does it mean to know that something is true?
That it's true, that it's, first of all, that it's not false.
Right.
It's not illusion, it's not fallacy, it's
Right.
absolute truth.
So we can know those things, right? In other words, so you would accept there is truth in the world and we can know it. That doesn't mean everyone does, but at least the possibility is there. That some things, there is truth, there is objectivity, and we can know it. So therefore Krishna is true, and you can know that. Because when you say, in philosophical terms, if you say that I know something, you also mean to say that I can know it, which is not a tautology. It's not. What I mean to say is that, let's say, for example, if I say, I know that I'm in Florida right now. What that means is that implicit in my statement, I'm saying that I am created in such a way, or I exist in such a way, that I'm capable of that kind of knowledge. So, consider that if God is there, and God speaks, and that speaking is recorded, and we have a book, then God speaks to us because He wants us to understand something. In other words, not just like playing a trick or hide and go seek, or giving us like a hallucinogenic experience, but actually it's a straightforward communication, just like the father wants to tell the son something. So we have that book, Bhagavad Gita. How can we know? You see, that question could be interpreted in different ways. By how do we know, you mean the mechanical process. We'd say just because we are conscious beings and we can become aware of that truth. If you mean how can we know in the sense that it's sort of saying, well, how could that possibly be true, that we could know such a thing? Because it's God's intention that we know. You see, because God is there, because God exists, ultimately you can only know anything, whether it's what time it is, or there's a fly on your nose, or that it's George Washington's birthday, or any kind of information, or that there's a soul in your body. You can't know anything unless God allows you to know it. So how can we know that the Bhagavad Gita is true? Because God wants us to know that. So that's how it becomes possible. And you can know it. In fact, you can know it more than you know anything else. Descartes posed this problem. It's called the argument of the demon, that what if there's some demon with magical powers who's bewildering all of us, so that actually everything we think we know, we don't really know. In other words, how would you prove there is such a demon? Of course, from one point of view, you could never get around that skepticism, because no matter what kind of proof you could bring, you'd say, well, that's just another illusion. Exactly. But then, and that argument has been reformulated in different ways. Then I think one British philosopher, G.E. Moore, finally said, basically he said that's a bunch of BS. That's basically what he did. And he gave various arguments to show that that's not true, that that's not really true, and that we can know things. And so without going into all of his technical arguments, the idea is that we can know. And someone may pose a theoretical doubt or say, well, maybe you're just being bewildered. In other words, Descartes called it a demon. We could say maybe it's just some trick to believe in. Why do you believe in this God? You see, that whole concept of false gods, that whole concept of false gods is really an outgrowth of fanaticism, either Christian fanaticism or Muslim fanaticism. It's fanaticism because I think a more philosophical outlook would force you to see that there's one God and he's being worshipped in different ways in different places. We see it that way. The idea that a person could sincerely try to approach the Supreme Father, pray to the Supreme Father, appeal to Him, try to serve Him, but just because He didn't use the word that you like or didn't perform a ritual just as you perform it, therefore it's actually the devil. In other words, first of all, it doesn't say much for God. So then approaching God becomes almost like it becomes a very technical operation, almost a mechanical thing where if you make a wrong move, you go over the ledge. And there's no pity, there's no understanding, you don't get any points for intention.
Very good. Can you, that would be based, besides on an intellectual level,
Yes.
can you know on an emotional level, for example?
Of course.
If you walk, for my experience, I walked on top of a mountain in Costa Rica at night with followers from friends of mine, and we looked up at the sky, and you see all the heavenly work. How can there not be a God? I mean, it takes a lot more faith to believe that there is no God.
Exactly.
To believe that there.
Exactly. But
So that was an emotional response, not an intellectual.
I would say we could demonstrate, I think, reasonably, that we have more emotional involvement with the holy than the fanatics that criticize us. Because according to all the scriptures, according to St. Paul, and according to Jesus, and according to Krishna and everyone else, the real proof that you have an authentic emotional involvement with the sacred, with God, is you become detached from other emotional experiences, like with your girlfriend and everything else. Just the whole world out there in which we get so emotionally involved. My wife, my children, my parents, my country, my money, my house, my this, my that. We don't stop to think all these things are temporary. They didn't exist before. They won't exist in the future. That actually we're all one universal family. So, in other words, we say put up or shut up. The proof that I am emotionally involved, or that he's emotionally involved with the holy, is that we've given up material things. In other words, we've given up other types of emotional experiences. Whereas people that claim to be religious, but we see they are actually very much emotionally involved with mundane things, they're the charlatans. You see, they're the charlatans. So of course, you're right, it's not just a big head thing. It's not just all in the head and logic and
Because an Aborigine could have the same experience without having the benefit of an education or the intellect.
Absolutely. God is
reading scripture.
Ultimately, the point is just to love God.
That was an excellent answer. Okay. And of course, the follow-up to that, then if it is true, then it is the word God. Okay.
Of course.
Okay, one form.
In fact,
But not exclusive.
In fact, the Word of God should make sense. For starters, openers. So, if you read the Bhagavad Gita, you actually get the most reasonable understanding of God. You see? Krishna explains everything very reasonably. And there's nothing objectionable about it. It's very simple. He's explained everything so simply. There are eternal souls, that's us, and we are all eternal servants of God. And there's the Supreme Father. Somehow we're entangled in this material world, entangled because we're trying to exploit it.
Right.
We have to let go and give up that sense gratification and instead try to serve the Lord, and He'll rescue us. I think that covers pretty much all the basic points, doesn't it?
Okay. Another follow-up to that one. Can we have knowledge? We're talking about knowledge of God. Okay. Say without. I mentioned on an emotional level. if we exclude the scriptures, and if we exclude...
There would have to be a good reason to do that, though. If you love someone, you don't want to hear about anything else except that person. Let's say, for example, just give a simple example, like let's say a girl has a boyfriend in high school, and he's, let's say, the captain of the football team. Give some real corny example. So then, let's say he just did some spectacular thing in a big game. And what if she says, well, I don't want to hear about it? But what if someone brings her, like all the press clippings, you know, she says, well, I don't want to hear about it. Then that would be a very bizarre reaction, wouldn't it? In other words, if she actually loves this person, or, you know, mundane, gross example, then the symptom is she doesn't want to hear anything else. I remember in junior high school, the girls would get their, you know, crushes on the different boys. They would just write their names all over their notebooks, you know, all these things that women do. So actually, the symptom of becoming attached to someone is that you don't want to hear about anything else. So what are the scriptures? The scriptures are books that glorify God, and it is possible to be in error. In other words, there's a science of God. Sometimes we may misunderstand. So here are books. Who wrote the scriptures? The greatest saintly persons, and God himself. They're coming from God and persons that love God, and their glorification of God. So if someone says, I don't want the scriptures, that person must have some unscrupulous motive. Because you say you love God, here are books that glorify God, give you extraordinary information about God. They're coming from persons who are extremely advanced in their own understanding. How could you want to hear about anything else?
Well, for example, in the case of someone who was deprived of access to...
Well, that's a different case, but why were they deprived? There's no accidents. In other words, why was someone born, let's say, in Outer Mongolia or Upper Slobovia, or wherever we're talking about? Why were they born there by their karma? In other words, if you see, that's what's so nice about Vedic philosophy, is it's fully rational. Not artificially, not like a big head trip, as they say. But it's fully rational in the sense that things happen for a reason. What is rationality after all? Rationality means that you explain things in terms of legitimate causes. This happened because of that, and that happened because of this, and you understand what the value of the different things is. So, in the Vedic worldview, if someone's born in Upper Slobovia or Outer Mongolia or Cucamonga or whatever, you see, there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that.
Can he know God?
Yes, but to know God completely, of course, God can reveal himself to anyone, anywhere. Then he can certainly develop because the love of God is in everyone's heart. So it's in the heart of every creature. So at any moment, if that person is fortunate because of their previous activities, whatever, that love can awaken. But still, here we have specific information about God that tells you, what God actually is, and he's something wonderful. Now, of course, those are the exceptional cases. I think it's necessary to establish the general rule first, because if you first just try to establish the extraordinary 1 in a million, it's like a 600-yard golf, 600-yard hole and you get a hole-in-one or something, isn't it? Because actually you hit the ball in the wrong direction, it was picked up by an eagle and carried away, and the eagle then, tired just over the cup and dropped it, and the eagle dropped into the... Right. So you could say, well, that's logically possible, but why try to play golf that way?
But if...
So my point is, first you should understand what the general rule is.
Right.
The general rule is, if you want information, you go to someone who has that information. You see, if you put it wholly on the emotional level, you get into fanaticism and just insanity almost. In other words, it can't be wholly emotional. Therefore, Prabhupada always said, religion and philosophy. There must be devotion, there must be love for God, and there should be also a clear understanding. If you have logic without devotion, it's just dry and... Exactly, it's empty. It's empty. And if you have just emotion with no reason, then you get all kinds of bizarre cults and all kinds of excesses, isn't it?
Besides to serve God, are we here for any other reason?
No.
Okay, that's an easy question. What is man's ultimate destiny?
God.
Return to God.
Yes. I mean, he's got a pretty amazing place up there. It certainly beats Palm Beach County. Yeah, the people out here in Palm.
Okay.
Isn't it? I mean, it stands to reason. If he's God, it's not that he doesn't live in a slum or just in a. I mean, obviously he's got a fantastic place up there, and that's the best place. That's where the most beautiful people are. That's where the most happiness is. Life is eternal.
Okay. How does Krishna consciousness relate to Christianity and scriptures, for example, about Jesus Christ?
Jesus Christ is the Son of God.
The Son of God, or
the
Son of God?
Well, if he's the only Son of God, what are you?
Is he?
Then are you not a Son of God?
I am a son.
Well,
son, but is he the only begotten Son?
But what does that mean?
In other words, is he part of a Trinity? In other words, is he part of a Father, Son, Spirit? We're all sons and daughters of God, children of God, if you will. Not strictly, but. So, in other words,
Jesus Christ he's a great Son of God. But God has his mission all over the universe. God is doing many different things. I don't think Jesus Christ came to teach that all the great pure devotees of the Lord who appeared before were all foolish and useless. I mean, there are many examples in India, for example. Many examples in India, people who were great sons of God, who gave their lives for preaching, and who always loved God, who were always thinking and talking about God. What are they?
But
what's their position?
But if
you answer that. What's their position?
I don't.
In other words, are we going to be dogmatic or philosophical? In other words, the difference between dogma and philosophy is philosophy, which maybe philosophy can come from revelation, and philosophy can be spiritual. But by philosophy we mean that you give a reasonable explanation, a reasonable definition of the things, and then you see what fits where. It's just like if we're talking about divine sons of God. Let's give a reasonable definition, in religious terms, of what the symptoms would be. How we'd recognize someone who is truly God's chosen representative. Number one, his behavior would be pure. He'd be free from sin, isn't it?
Absolutely.
In other words, we wouldn't expect to find him at the Golden Arches, or in a liquor shop, or hanging around looking for women, or we wouldn't expect to find gambling, at the horse races, or at the I don't know what they have here, dog races. I guess we got everything. So that's the first thing. If he was really a divine representative, because we're all originally divine. I mean, in the spiritual world, everyone's divine. Otherwise, what are they doing there? So, no sin, sinless, immaculate behavior, pure. Number two, pure not only in the negative sense of free from sin, pure in the positive sense of completely devoted to God. He loves God with all his heart, soul, and might. And in fact, that's why he's sinless. He's sinless because he loves God as everything, not something, everything. So when you find such a person, is that person mundane? No. They're spiritual. They're a divine Son of God. Now, if you say that Jesus Christ is the only one that can save us from our sins, you have a problem there. Because how do you account for people, for example, that worship Krishna and give up all their sins? In other words, to be saved means to be saved from something. To be saved from something. So what do you have to be saved for? Saved from? What is it we have to be saved from in down-to-earth terms?
Well, there's a need for reconciliation.
Right. So, but what is it that we have to be saved from? Ignorance is one thing. Forgetfulness of God.
Separation from God.
Exactly. Now, if by worshiping Krishna, someone becomes completely devoted to God, gives up all sinful activities, then how can you say that God hasn't accepted that person?
I only have one problem with that. If I look in the scriptural way, biblically, and I believe that it is inerrant, then when I look at that scriptural part that says, no man comes to the Father.
Yes, now Christ made that statement at a particular time and place. Now there are two ways to interpret any statement. That he was speaking to those people at that time, or he was speaking to all people at all times. Now there you get into interpretation. Now there's no doubt in my mind, really, that at the place and time Christ said that, it was true. And for example, even in our scriptures, there are some statements which are no longer applicable or are not universally applicable. Krishna himself, who is God, in the Bhagavatam, for example, sometimes says you have to perform this and that ritual or these laws to obey, and we don't do it nowadays because it's for previous ages. So, Christ said at a particular time and place, he made a statement. Now, if you want to apply that to other times and places, you have to justify that. Don't just say, well, no, we're just blindly following Christ. Because whether you're following or not is the point of discussion. Now this blind rejection of other people who obviously are serving God, obviously, is actually, it's completely discredited Christian fanatics. Now even the Catholic Church, even the Catholic Church has, you were born in a Catholic family? First there was that Vatican II conference, isn't it? And in Vatican II, while affirming that it is in Christ that people may find the fullness of religious life, according to them, the Declaration calls for a recognition and affirmation of positive elements in the world's religions. The Church rejects nothing that is true and holy in these religions. The document exhorts all Catholics to, quote, recognize, preserve, and promote the good things, spiritual and moral, of the religions through dialogue and collaboration with the followers of other religions. Now, there's many other quotes like that. And it is obvious that in the meeting, this is from a Catholic monastery in India, it is obvious that in the meeting of religions, India will have an important, if not decisive, part to play, not only in view of its past history, which can boast of a spiritual tradition second to none in the history of mankind, but also in the light of its recent development, India has a natural claim to spiritual leadership. India has brought forth men of spiritual genius to whom it would be difficult to find any parallel in the West. In other words, you have to decide. Of course, someone can just be dogmatic. I can decide, for example, that, let's say that plant over there is an incarnation of God. And that may sound ludicrous, but God did appear as a burning bush. Like I say, this one just doesn't burn, but it's the same principle. So that plant over there is God. And anyone that doesn't surrender to that plant is a demon. If you don't bow down to my plant, you're a heathen and a demon, and you'll burn forever in hell. And nothing you can say to me will change my mind. And in fact, the more reasonable your arguments are, the more clever they are, the more proof that is that you're the devil. So this, practically speaking, this throwback to the Dark Ages is really, it's really outrageous. That there's a group of people who are so stubborn and fanatical and mindless, that they are absolutely impervious to reason or philosophy. I'm not talking about atheistic reason or just materialistic logic. I'm talking about devotional reason based on a deep sensitivity to God, a desire to surrender to Him. And so, in other words, let us establish to say that God will not accept anyone in the world, even someone that loves Him. That's not true.
Okay.
Actually, we would say that it is the Vaishnava tradition which is giving the best answers. For example, you can't answer within your dogmatic framework, fanatical framework. You can't answer simple questions like, well, the simple questions, like the stereotype questions. Why is a child suffering? Why is a child suffering? I mean, isn't suffering caused by sin? Does God make innocent people suffer?
I don't know.
You see? So what is it? So it's not a philosophy at all. It's just a dogmatic fanaticism. We know that God doesn't make innocent people suffer. And because the soul is eternal and has always existed, therefore, what's the suffering we encounter in this life comes from our previous life. Another point is this point of eternal hell. This is outrageous. The crime should match the punishment. I mean, God, even in any ordinary law court, in any civilized country in the world, this fanatical God of some people would be convicted of cruel and unusual punishment.
But can you really draw that correlation between a human court and a divine
You can
court?
you can say that by any reasonable standards. I mean, just like in our own experience, we see that sometimes a child's rebellious, he may even go against his father or mother and leaves home. That happens sometimes, and later there's reconciliation. So to say that God, who doesn't see things in our, limited historical terms, God sees eternity. Therefore, for God, 1,000,000 years is nothing. It's a flash. It's like a little, I don't want to maybe say caffex break. You see, so from God's point of view, even 1,000,000 years is nothing. I mean, it's a very short amount of time for God. He's God. So to say that God's going to give you, let's say 10, 20 years, and just because, you were obnoxious and a sort of a jerk and you didn't surrender to God, in other words, you're just going through one of those obnoxious phases in your evolution where you're stubborn, didn't want to serve God. And you get billions of years of suffering for that? I mean, that is simply unfair. It is unfair. And it's nonsense.
And it's ungodly.
It's ungodly. It's actually demonic. It's actually devilish. It's funny because these people say everyone is a devil, but to take someone who just, let's say, rejected you. First of all, God, all these analogies that, he is an angry God, and he is, and he is really smoking now, boy. You're finished. God, first of all, God doesn't have material emotion. It's not like us, people, like someone steps on your foot, and you want to fight him and punch him in the nose. I mean, God doesn't have those kind of emotions. He's detached. So therefore, he will correct you. He will punish you. But he's not, he's not a
He's
temper.
just.
He's just. And he's understanding. And he's mature. He's God. He's not immature.
Where do these people get this, born again Christians, where do they get the solace that they appear to have? I mean,
What?
probably don't. I mean, they eat meat, and they engage in illicit sex. A lot of them don't take drugs or alcohol. But they don't consider sex illicit sex. They don't consider meat eating a sin.
It doesn't matter. If someone is engaging in sex and meat eating, then that's going to make them very dull in terms of certain spiritual truths.
Okay.
So as far as their personal lives, from what I've heard, they're notorious.
I don't necessarily subscribe to.
I understand.
I'm taking
Devil's
devil's
advocate.
advocate for certain questions.
But that's my point. You see, the punishment corresponds to the crime. And how? I mean, let's say you as a father. Are you a father?
No.
Okay, let's say you were a father. Think of your own father. When does a father come to the point where he says that for what you have done, I will never, ever, ever again even consider accepting you, even if you want to come back, and that's good forever. Billions and trillions and trillions and trillions of years. I mean, even my own mundane father with all his imperfections is more compassionate than that.
Okay, that brings me to.
And what is God according to these fanatics? They can't explain. They talk about God's Son. That's all right. But what is God? Who's God? If God's Son, if you talk about the Trinity, if God's Son can come down, why can't God come down? After all, I mean, who's going to stop him? Why can't God come down if he wants to come down?
I'm sure he did.
Yes, Krishna. So my point is, who is God? You talk about the Son of God, we got a tremendous amount of information of Christ, biographical information about God's Son. So we have all that information about God's Son. You say, all right, now here's the $64,000 question. Who's God? You said there's no specific information. But we have that information.
There is some information.
Yeah, there is some, I said no specific.
Well, his father Abraham, father Isaac.
All right, so who is he? In other words, you could say God is omnipotent, God is omniscient, he's all loving, he's this, he's that.
Everything.
But who is that person? Otherwise, it's you know what it's like? So you take a political science course, and you learn all about the presidency. The president must be at least 35 years of age. He must be a born, American citizen. Or, I don't know if that's true. Or yeah, born American citizen, and he has these powers and these privileges and these duties. But you can study the presidency for 10 years, or get a PhD in it. You may not know who the president is. So it's something. That's what I mean by specific information. We can talk about the office of God. These are the powers, these are the qualities. But now the question is, well, who is the person?
Or it's the personality.
Exactly. So who is God? That they can't answer. So there are two important criteria to judge how good a religious process is. One is how much information, let's say the quantity and quality of the information. You could have a lot of information about something that could be trivial. Just like, let's say, you wanted to show that you were a scholar in American history, and let's say, you knew things like how many lampposts there were in Kentucky in the 19th century. Just like, let's say, you wanted to show that you were a scholar in American history, and let's say, you knew things like how many lampposts there were in Kentucky in the 19th century, and you knew how many wagon wheels were produced in a particular factory in Concord, Massachusetts. In other words, the quantity and the quality of the information should be fundamental. It should be basic. It should be broad in scope. It should be significant information. So that's what I call it, the quality of the information. And the quantity also. So the quantity, the quality of the information is one important thing. Another thing is, does it work? By doing that, do you become free from your sins? Are you saved? Now what does it mean to say that you're saved from something but you're still doing it? It's like saying, I've been saved from the measles, but I still have the measles. Or, I was saved, I fell in the ocean, I was saved, so where are you now? Well, I'm still in the water. In other words...
Either you're saved or you're not.
Yeah, if you're saved from something, you should, that means you don't do it anymore.
Then you become Christ-like.
Exactly.
Okay.
So one who becomes Christ-like is on the path of Christ. So...
Amen.
Hallelujah.
Okay. The next one, and these get a little as we go along.
The next one is for 5,000 points.
No.
It's like a game show.
No, it's not.
We get trickier and I get more points.
No.
I'm just kidding.
With respect. Okay. What is the origin of the universe?
God, Krishna.
So, okay, that's some of these are very broad. Where did life begin?
Life? I mean, like in the slime or...
No, is there a written record of where life began?
Yes! The Srimad Bhagavatam gives the whole history of the universe. See, it's not like in some circles where they say the world was created 5,000 years ago, whatever. I don't know what figure they give. We have a history that goes back billions and trillions of years. According to the Bhagavatam is very cosmopolitan in the sense that it explains that universes, it talks about millions of universes, billions of universes, and cycles of creation. So it's just a big thing, It's not like, well, there's only life on Earth and it was created a few thousand years. It's not like that. So we learn that, just as the cosmologists at MIT also suspect, that there are cycles where the universe expand and then they contract. The Bhagavad Gita says, Bhutva, Bhutva, Praliyate, becoming, and they are annihilated. In other words, cycles, Bhutva, Bhutva, again and again, creation, annihilation. So that from the Vedic point of view, the creation of a universe is sort of a ho-hum affair, It's not there's billions of universes and there's billions of creation cycles. It's a huge concept. And And so one particular universe lasts about 300 trillion years. And so the whole history of the universe is given in the Bhagavatam. Of course, it's a top-down affair, not bottom-up. In other words, it comes from God down through superior beings. Then, another amazing thing is that all these billions of universes come out of the body of the Supreme Lord. Not his original form, but he expands himself into a form called Mahavishnu. This is all explained in the scriptures. Jakaranarana-vajale bhajati smajoganidram-ananta jagaranda saroma-kupa adhara sakti-mavalambya parang samurti govindamadi purusham tamam vajami. I worship Govinda, Krishna, the primeval Lord, from the pores of whose skin of his transcendental body as Mahavishnu. Billions of universes come out. And those universes are like little particles. In other words, the whole universe, God can make himself so big. He has one form called Mahavishnu, in which he can make himself so large that a whole universe is like a little speck next to him. Then he can make himself so small, he enters into a universe, and he can enter into an atom within a universe. As I've said, Krishna can make himself so small that he can actually go for a 30-minute walk in one direction inside an atom. So that's God. He can go jogging inside an atom, not even make a turn. He can just jog in a straight direction inside an atom. So that's God. So the Vedic aphorism is Anoraniyan Mahato Mahiyan, that he can be smaller than the smallest, greater than the greatest. So you see, we know how God is great. So isn't this information, it's attractive. Why reject it? Scriptures are fascinating. So, that's Krishna. That's creation. So the whole history, the whole genealogy, cosmic genealogy is given in the scriptures.
I lost my place. Oh, okay. Is there or can there be true morality without belief in God?
True morality? No.
Or can one be moral without belief?
It depends on what you call moral. If you mean paying your taxes, helping old ladies across the street, you don't smoke, and,
You don't kill.
You don't kill. There are some people that do that, but ultimately they kill because they encourage others in material life, which causes not only one death, but innumerable deaths. You see? It's like, what if, for example, what if we were trapped somewhere? Let's say we were trapped somewhere and we were going to be killed, and there was a way out. And I came and told you there was a way out, and you didn't tell the other people. In fact, you told them that it wasn't true, and it was true. Now let's talk in ordinary legal terms. We don't have a lawyer here, but Ajay, you know about law. What if people were trapped somewhere, and they were going to die, and an authorized person came and told them how they could escape, but you obstructed that, so they could not be saved? You're liable, practically, for wrongful death of those people. So in other words, you can say a person that just minds his own business and follows moral principles, yes, he'll get some points for that.
Atheists can be moral, in other words.
They can, if you take morality to mean not killing people. Just like, for example, there are some atheists that defend our right to preach, and also that defend the right of pornography. So when they defend the right of, let's say, spiritual teaching, they're helping people. And when they defend the right of pornography, they're hurting people.
But isn't atheism the ultimate immorality?
Yes, because that morality will not ultimately help you. You see? It will not... You see, Krishna is very objective. One thing I find very attractive about Krishna is his quality of detachment. That's one of Krishna's 6 opulences, by the way. We don't talk about that one so much. But Krishna is very cosmopolitan. For example, if you follow certain moral principles so that you're in the mode of goodness. Krishna talks about the mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. You'll notice that in all of those discussions, there's no theism in it. It's just very matter of fact. If you're a vegetarian, whether you believe in God or not, you're in the mode of goodness. I mean, let's say certain kinds of vegetarianism. And then, let's say you're peaceful, you're serene, You're nice to other people. So you get credit for that, whether you're a theist or not. Because Krishna is he's very detached. But you remain within the cycle of birth and death. It's like a Ferris wheel. You may be on the top, you're going to go down. So inevitably, in this material world, sooner or later, we, make a boo-boo. We commit sins. We do the wrong thing. We can be moral, but for how long? People are moral for some time, but then eventually, whether it's in this life or the next life, you get tired of it, you want to do something else. You try out immorality. So the idea is everyone's rotating. We get bored in this world. And so people rotate. As long as we stay in this world, we're subjected to birth and death. So another point is everything belongs to God. So it's ultimately immoral to be an atheist because you're using God's property without any gratitude, without cooperating with Him. So that's immoral.
Okay. Are there some basic differences, or in other words, what are the basic differences or similarities between Krishna consciousness and Hinduism? Or are there no similarities?
Hinduism is a sort of a mishmash, if you know what that word means.
Yeah, sure.
Hinduism is a modern version, and it includes all kinds of. I'll tell you what it is. Hinduism includes a lot of Vedic things, but they're all out of order. In other words, it's almost like if you took all the parts of a motor and just threw them in a bag and tried to make the car move. In other words, you've got the real parts, and they are motor parts, and they will work if they're put in the proper order. But you take all the motor parts, just throw them in a bag, and then put them under the trunk, and try to.
So it's not pure.
It's just a big mess. Because, for example, in other words, there's a hierarchy. So they lost that hierarchy. So instead of things being in the proper progressive order, they just throw everything in the same bag and say it's all one, it's all the same, do whatever you want. You know what it's like? It's almost like if you took all the different courses, let's say in the public school system, just threw them all together. So, so a 17-year-old person is learning, 2 plus 2 is 4, and little kids and some, high school calculus. In other words, everything's just a big mess. Everyone does whatever they want, reads whatever. It's just a big mess. So Krishna consciousness, or real Vedic culture, is a systematic, scientific progression from step to step of spiritual evolution. They've taken all these different elements, thrown them all into a big bag, don't recognize anymore the distinctions, and therefore you don't move anymore. You don't go. In other words, the motor doesn't work anymore. So that India is becoming corrupted.
So they stay in the life and death cycle, basically.
Oh yeah. Of course, there are still people in India.
Exceptions.
Who know.
Okay.
Who know. But things are becoming very disarrayed.
Okay. Is abortion allowable under any circumstances? For example, under circumstances of rape, incest, health of the mother, deformity of the child, or is that completely out of it?
In the case of, like the mother is going to die, then I think that would be the most serious argument in favor of abortion. If a woman is definitely going to die. Of course, it's very noble for a mother to give her life to save her child, but she's not up to that. And you tell her that, well, do you want to kill yourself so your baby can live? And she says, no, I can't do it. I don't want to give my life. That would be a more touchy situation.
If in fact the child is...
But for rape, no. Two wrongs don't make a right.
Right. If in fact the child is deformed, then is it the mother's karma or the child's karma?
Both.
Or both?
If you can do abortion for that, why don't we just go and kill all the Vietnam vets that lost a limb or something? Why don't we just go and shoot them?
I know.
Actually, in Sparta, they did things like that. They were in Greek culture in classical times. They built all those statues of the body. So they so much admired the human body. They actually they kind of liked that idea of killing deformed people because people didn't like to look at them.
Ancient Aryans, huh? How about euthanasia? Again, same circumstance. Killing.
It's absurd because in Vedic culture, if someone's practiced spiritual life and he's very old, he's the most wise person. the wisest person. But in our culture, which is just go, 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 sense gratification, when you're old and decrepit, you're a complete failure because you can't enjoy anymore. So it's better you just get out of the way. But actually, the older people, they should be enlightening everyone instead of just going to play golf in Sun City or dance the hokey pokey in Miami Beach. It's actually a disgrace. It's a disgrace that old people are shameless. It's obvious they're going to die at any moment. Instead of, really trying to understand God and really get themselves ready for a blessed future, what are they? They're dancing the hokey pokey. They're playing golf. They're making complete asses out of themselves. Even some of them go to Singer Island. So the idea is that an old person should enlighten the younger people. Then they'll be respected. Who's going to kill his guru? Who would kill his... Now, if someone is suffering so much they can't stand the pain, he may prefer to die. Someone may not want to live on a machine, with all kinds of tubes. They're sucking out all of his income, all of his insurance money and savings. So he may say, well, I don't want to live on tubes. It's artificial. It's apparent that my body is sort of, it doesn't work anymore. And I think, God is calling me, so I'd rather just go and get a new one, trade it in, get a new model. So if you know you're eternal, and you know God is watching you, then if your body doesn't work anymore, you may not want to spend a couple of years somewhere hooked up to a bunch of tubes or this, and you may think, well, it's just God's arrangement that I'm meant to die in.
Would it be considered a sin? Would he look upon it as sin?
If you just refused all kinds of artificial treatment, that would not be a sin. In other words, if they want to hook you up to all kinds of machines, you just say, well, let me just go in peace. That's not a sin.
But someone making this decision for someone else, a husband for a wife for a husband, in other words,
someone that's senile or lost.
They're brain dead and they're just vegetating. Is that a sin or not? Or
if someone is brain dead, I don't think it's a duty to keep someone hooked up to so many machines. I don't think in other words, if the person, because what's the use? If someone's body actually has sort of gone through its useful time is up, and it's no longer useful anymore, why not let the person get a nice new body?
Or maybe not have to get a body.
Or maybe go back to God.
Right.
Why? That's it. In other words, if you can treat someone medically, yes, treat them. But if it's a question of very artificial existence, meaningless existence, then that's not necessary.
If we accept the fact that God created everything, okay, did he also create the occult, ghosts,
oh yes, of
poltergeists, all that sort of thing?
Of course.
Okay.
Because some people want it.
So forth.
Because some people want it.
Does it all go back to because he's the ultimate enjoyer?
No, it's because people have sinful desires and people desire to forget God, so he gives them different ways to forget him.
But that's contradictory, isn't it?
No, because he gives people enough rope to hang themselves, but after you've hung yourself for a while, you can come back.
Okay. It's common knowledge.
Get tired of swinging on the gallows.
It's common knowledge. In the Second World War, 6 million Jews were exterminated. Okay. Is this a karmic action? And what was their sin?
Was it karma? Of course, some of them were very outraged to hear that it was karma. But if we just talk about it in a more simple case, take just an individual. Because the number 6 million, of course, is very...
Or 18 million Russians.
Yeah, it's a very intimidating number. Yeah, Stalin killed something like 18 million Russians. So these numbers are very staggering. So if we just talk about an individual case, let's say an individual is killed. Yes, it's karma. So all those, you could say 6 million Jews were killed, yes, it's a very tragic thing. But most of them probably, or not, I would say most of them, but perhaps most of them would have died of natural causes. In other words, there's a type of illusion that occurs, let's say by now they would have died, there's a kind of illusion that occurs where we think that if we're not killed, we don't die. People, just like Yudhisthira, the king was once asked, to save his life, he had to answer this question. A series of questions. Fortunately, I'm not exactly in that type of hot suit right now. But he had to answer a list of questions. And one of the questions was, what is the most amazing thing in the world? So he answered immediately, very intelligent. He said, Ahani hani bhutani gachanti vajamaliyam sesa sthavaram ichanto kimaschari matapparam. He said that although every day we see people have to die, one after one, people die. Still, the people that are still left, they think they're not going to die. In other words, our whole way of life is based on the mind, mental state, or the psychological state of thinking my life is permanent. For example, say you're on an airplane and suddenly hit some bad turbulence and people, they get real nervous. Suddenly everything changes, right? People completely change their behavior. People on the plane are joking and talking and someone's drinking or smoking or this or that. And suddenly it all stops, everyone becomes very quiet and serious. And I've talked to people that run real bad flights, real bad, where it actually got a little, you began to wonder, is this it? People are crying and praying and, there was behavior, when we are forced to confront our own mortality, it completely changes us. So therefore I say that this whole modern materialistic civilization is based on the premise, whether it's stated or simply felt, that I'm not going to die. Because if we felt we were going to die, we would act differently. So therefore, it is a great illusion. So it's very shocking that 6 million people were killed. What about the 6 billion people that have died in this century? In other words, what about the fact that everyone is dying?
I think that they're probably wrong.
Now that doesn't lessen the sin. If 6 million people are killed, that does not lessen the sin of people who killed them. See, sometimes we feel that in order to get more emotional punch or more righteous, punch into it, it can't be karma. They have to be innocent victims. Otherwise, we won't fully appreciate the evilness and the sheer, demonic nature of the crime. In other words, let's say certain Nazis killed a lot of Jewish people, or Stalin killed a lot of Russian people. Somehow or other, our moral outrage is diluted, we think. If we say the people that were killed, somehow it was their karma. You see? Somehow that seems to justify the crime. So in order to let's say, focus all of our moral outrage against the perpetrators of that act, we can in no way admit any type of guilt or any type of responsibility on the part of the victims. You see, but that's actually what's happening psychologically, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And in fact, they did a study, and they found that whether or not capital punishment is a deterrent, personally, I know that it is. Although certain liberal criminologists, I think, sort of juggle the statistics because they're against. In other words, they begin with the premise that capital punishment is bad, then they sort of come up with the statistics. But anyway, that is not a deterrent. But what many concluded is that whether or not it's a deterrent, it's necessary for just the citizens in general, because society becomes completely demoralized if they don't see people being punished for their crimes. It actually demoralizes the society.
Would you agree with capital punishment?
Oh yes, absolutely. Because otherwise, if you kill someone, if you're not killed by the state, then your next life you'll have to suffer. Or in this life, the karma is there. It's better you deserve it. Your soul's not being killed. It's actually due to atheism that people are against capital punishment, because they feel that there's no afterlife. But anyway, that's a little footnote. But my point here is that if someone is mature, they don't have to think that the victim was totally innocent in order to fully condemn the crime against them. The crime against them. You see? Mm-hmm. So the idea is that what happens to me, whatever happens to me, is my karma. Of course, it's like cows are being killed. So according to our philosophy, that's the most hideous sin. Also killing people, of course, but especially cows. Or let's say killing anyone that's innocent and can't fight back, whether it's a Jew in a concentration camp or a cow, whatever. They're great sins. So we know that someone wouldn't be born as a cow and couldn't be in the slaughterhouse unless he did something. It's not hard to figure out what he did in this country. So, in other words, they must have killed animals or they participated in this whole meat industry. Still, it does not lessen our outrage at the event. So we can feel moral outrage that the Jews were killed. For example, I was born in a Jewish family, and my grandmother told me stories of how she saw, I don't know if most or I think most of the people in her family, she saw them killed before her eyes by Russian cavalry. So, I mean, I heard stories like this. So it's, you know, they just rode into the town one day with swords and started cutting people to pieces. So it's not that we don't feel moral outrage at these things. It is. In other words, the crime of killing a person who has not offended you or is not an innocent person is not less because it's that person's karma. Just like, for example, if you kill a cow, you can say, well, you can justify any murder. You can say, well, I killed some. Let's say I come to you with a gun, not even a cow, say you, and I say, well, I'm going to pull the trigger. If a bullet comes out, it was your karma. And so in that case, I'm not guilty of anything because it was your karma. So you would have suffered anyway, so I could do, in other words, you could do anything with impunity. You could commit any sin.
That would be like Jim Jones.
Exactly. You could kill anyone and just say, well, if you die, it was your karma. The idea, as they say in Spanish, say, junte el hambre con la gana de comer. Yes. In this case, in a sense that, let's say it was your karma to die. And let's say God knows that I have the intention of committing a great sin. So those two people will be brought together.
So it could have been that part of those Nazi officers, their karma was to kill these Jews.
Not their karma, their sinful desire.
In other words, it's not the result.
They were not because they had no reason. They could. It was not justified. It was a great sin to kill those people.
So now they must suffer.
Of course they must suffer.
Whatever.
Of course.
Whatever the comps or lack of whatever the punishment. Right?
Oh yes, definitely must be punished. So what I mean to say is that even though it may be someone's karma by God's, you see, many Jewish people became atheists after that event, or they write books like "Why Bad Things Happen to Good People." See, there's always two ways out of that. Two artificial ways. The real way is just understanding Bhagavad Gita. We have previous lives. So if you say, why did bad things happen to good people? Either God is all powerful but not good, or God is all good but not all powerful. So actually, there was a best-selling book by a rabbi saying that God is not omnipotent, which of course is a type of atheism. God is not omnipotent. He is good, but he's not all powerful. You see, in order to preserve their moral outrage, they eventually it gets turned on God. Because if you want to say that, let's say I or my people suffered a great tragedy, and I will not admit that in any way, either in this or a previous life, we were responsible, or I was responsible. In other words, I'm going to maintain the full bitterness and the full bitterness of my moral outrage. Now, obviously, even a fool can understand that it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to God. The buck stops at God. He's the one that allowed it. He's all powerful. So all that bitterness and outrage, it goes very soon to God, because he's the one that sanctioned it. He could have stopped it. He's all powerful. So therefore, it's actually driven many of these people to atheism. Driven them to atheism. You see?
So, but by
and ultimately, it's also our false pride. Again, this does not condone the sinful act. That is a sin. Of course, a monstrous sin. But, point is, that I would say the Germans themselves, in the war, all the German women went to the church and praying, please let my father come home, my husband, my brother, my son. They were all praying. And a lot of them didn't come home. They also became atheists. You see, we think of the Germans as aggressors, and they were, They were the aggressors. Prabhupada said they started World War II because of envy. I just transcribed a few paragraphs today. I'm listening to Prabhupada's tapes, and I transcribed points that I find especially interesting. And today, Prabhupada was giving a lecture in England, and he said the Germans started both world wars. He said because they were envious of the British. The British had a huge empire, and that they wouldn't let the Germans do business within their empire. In other words, they had a monopoly. And the Germans, obviously there are a lot of factors involved. Germany, everyone knows how in World War II they got the shaft and all that. And so, he said because they're envious, so Prabhupada did say the Germans were the aggressors in those wars. They were the aggressors. So, I just transcribed that this morning. So, yes, I'm sure many monstrous sins were committed. I'm not denying that. But, still, it's because of false pride. I say, I will not admit that in any way I'm responsible for my suffering. You see, when you think about that, it's a stupid position to take. Because it's a very proud position, an arrogant. In other words, there is a God. I suffered. I didn't deserve to suffer.
Therefore, now there is no God, or he's not powerful.
Exactly.
By definition, God is omnipotent,
exactly,
good, etc.
So the old-fashioned God we reject. The Bible says God is all-powerful, obviously. So, in that way, they rejected God. So the price you pay for your pride in saying, I will not admit that I or my people is an extension of my ego. In other words, me and my people. Now, you're not. You see, I got my little ethnic group, you see, and you're not one of them. I like you and you're all right. Some of my best friends are like you, but ultimately, you see, you're not really like, you're not in with the in crowd. You don't belong to my ethno-cultural religious group. And so that warped mentality, of course, it's not a spiritual idea at all. Because spiritually, we all belong to the universal family.
Absolutely.
So therefore, the price we pay for that egotism of saying, me and my people are good, we're good people, we didn't deserve what God gave us. You see, there's something sick about that from the spiritual point of view. Whether it's coming from a German or a Jew or a Russian, look what they went through.